Lots happened in the last couple of days. We took our crankshaft back to Hurley Engine Services and they measured it up and confirmed that it was actually at the 4.2 litre spec. So what happened with that crankshaft, it was originally a 4 litre crankshaft and they did chromium buildup of the crankshaft. And if you go back and look at our videos, you can actually see the jagged edges from the chromium buildup right here where our rod ends are. So they have gone ahead and replaced that crankshaft. This one that's in the block right now is actually a 4 litre crank. We've gone ahead and installed it into the block. I'm not going to go through all of the steps again. It is exactly the same as what we did when we were installing the previous crankshaft.
If you have not seen part 4, you should take a look at that before you continue with this video. In part 4, we explain how to install the camshaft, as well as how to measure bearing clearances on the main shaft and connecting rods using a plastic gauge. We also took a look at how to install the rings on the piston, as well as what can go wrong if the rings don't slide into the bore correctly and get damaged.
The other thing that we've done is we've gone ahead and purchased a new set of rings. So we're going to take the oil rings out of here. We're going to actually put them into the bores and size them as per the service manual. And then we're going to put the oil rings onto the pistons and use a fresh set of oil rings when we install the pistons again. So one other thing that I did is I contacted my brother-in-law in the Netherlands who has built a 4 litre engine like this before, as well as Jason from Hurley Engine Services, and said that I was struggling to get my rings to compress and slide into my the bores of the cylinders. Both of them have mentioned that this sheet metal ring compressor that I'm using can be a little bit temperamental. You need to be very sure that it is square, and you need to keep it square while you're tapping the pistons through it. So both of them have suggested that I use a tapered ring compressor, which is this one. You'll see it is a round ring, and it is tapered, so it allows you to slide the pistons in, and as you're sliding the pistons in, it compresses the rings. Now just be careful if you do choose to use this. They are sized to the exact size of your bore. So we know we were oversized on our pistons, and so we actually went and measured our bores and we bought this one. Our bores are exactly 3.9 inches. So we're going to try and use this ring compressor when we install our pistons this time around.
So last time we installed our rings on our piston, we had Hurley Engine Services check this gap for us. With these being new rings, we're going to have to do that ourselves. So what we're going to do is follow our service manual, which requires us to install the ring into the bore, like that. And then we're going to take an old piston, and we're going to press the ring down with an old piston. And we do this to make sure that the ring is square in the bore. Once the ring is pressed down, we're going to take a feeler gauge and we're going to check that gap that we have in that ring. So you can see I can get this feeler gauge in, and this feeler gauge is a 0.01 inch or 0.25 millimeter, which is the minimum tolerance required on that ring. Now the maximum is far larger than that, so I'm not too worried about checking the maximum. It's not much more than what this is, but we do know we have the minimum required gap on this ring. So this ring is good, and we can install it onto the number 6 piston as we move forward. We're going to do the same and check all the other rings and replace them as we go forward. So with it all lubed, we're going to make sure to get the arrow on the piston pointing forward, and then we're going to set it in. The first step will be to get it into the ring compressor, and once it's in, we will then need to get it to enter into the bore of the cylinder at the bottom there. So there we go. We can now feel that it's entered into the ring compressor as well as into the bore of the cylinder, and if we just jiggle it, it'll drop down. All right, and then we're ready. We're going to give it a couple of light taps, and it should just tap straight into the block. There we go. That was much easier making use of this tapered compressor than what it is with the other one. So we've got that in. We're going to go ahead now and install the rest of the pistons. So you'll remember that our piston over here was standing proud with the incorrect crank in there. So what I'd like to do is actually just measure the clearance that we have now. The service manual says we need 0.0215 of an inch. So I've adjusted my feeler gauges to 0.0215, and if I can slide them underneath there like that, I know I have the required clearance. So I'll check another cylinder just to make sure, but I'm happy that we now have the correct combination of piston, rod and crank in here, and we can continue with our assembly. So we've installed all of the pistons now. We've rotated the crank a couple of times to make sure none of them are scoring any of the cylinder walls, so we know that the installation went well and all the rings are in the right place. The next thing that we're going to do is install our timing chain. So we've rotated the crank until piston number 1 is at the top center over here. Just remember that there are 2 rotations for every firing stroke, so it doesn't matter at this point because we haven't established the relationship between the camshaft and the crank yet. So number 1 is at top dead center. We are going to go ahead now and install our camshaft and make sure that we do the alignment with our timing marks. What I'm going to do is just oil up these surfaces over here, make sure that there's some lubrication in there before we start assembly. Okay, alright, so what I've done is I have aligned the 2 timing marks from the timing chain with each other, and now I'm going to orientate them and then hopefully, if everything goes well, just slide them into place. Alright, so I'm not sure if you can see over here, but these timing marks here are not aligned. So what we need to do now is undo this chain and allow this to slide over by 1 timing mark over there, so that we've got this aligned. And now we need to just rotate the cam ever so slightly to get it to fit in. Alright, we're just going to double check again that the timing marks are aligned, and now with the gentle tap slide that camshaft on. Alright, that's good. It's seated over there, and that's seated over there. So there we go, we've now got our timing chain and gears on, and our timing marks here are aligned. Take a center line through there and through there, make sure those 2 marks are aligned, so we know that our timing is now good. So we're good, new timing chain, good to go. So the service manual says to install the camshaft bolt and tighten it to 50 foot-pounds. I've decided to lubricate it with Loctite before I do that, make sure it doesn't come off. So we're going to pop that in there and then torque it to 50 foot-pounds. Great, so the bolt has now been torqued. Right, what the service manual now recommends is that you rotate the engine at least twice. We're going to do this in a clockwise direction. So there we have another top dead center. What you will see is that the timing marks now are out by 180 degrees. So cylinder number 6 is now at top dead center. We're going to continue to rotate it. Another full revolution over there. So we have our timing marks matching up again. So that's 1 full revolution. We have another top dead center there, which is 180 degrees out. So there's the 1 mark and there's the other mark. And we now have our timing marks here again aligned, those 2 timing marks aligned. So if we draw a center line through there, we have alignment of those 2 timing marks. So we know that the timing is correct and that the chain is correct. So that job is now done. We can move on to the next step. Right, the next thing we're going to install is the timing cover over here. So we've put a new seal in, and we've put a new gasket in. And I always like putting just a very small smear of RTV seal in just to help the gasket seat. Now, important thing to note is once we put this cover back on, we don't want to rotate our crank anymore. And the reason is that this relationship needs to remain like this until we put our cam sensor back in again. That is going to give us our camshaft timing. So that camshaft sensor goes in at the back of the engine here into the oil pump and on the cam. And we need to make sure that this timing remains when we slide that in, so that we are sure that our timing is correct. So I'm going to go ahead and install this next. Alright, so the service manual requires a special tool to center this cover. And the special tool is supposed to make sure that you're in the center over here. Now, I don't have a special tool. I was going to originally take the pulley and actually install the pulley, but then you can't reach this bolt over here at the back. So this is a little bit of a tricky one. What I've decided to do is to use this socket over here that sits fairly snugly over the shaft. And then what I'm going to do is just manually align it as best I can, and then tighten these bolts down from there.
Since making this video, the team at Twin Sticks Technologies, or TST, have designed this special service tool. If you need one, please take a look at their website or at the comments below for more information.
Right, one thing to be aware of is this bolt over here. Now it has a 5/8 head on it, so it's a very big head, but the bolt itself is only a 5/16 bolt. So the service manual says that this bolt needs to be torqued to 192 inch-pounds. So we've set up for that, and we're just going to click this off at 192 inch-pounds. There we go. All right, so that's all in. We're good to go to the next step. Right, the next thing that we need to install now is our crankshaft pulley over here, and to do that I'm going to have to use my pulley kit to pull that pulley on. Right, the first thing that we want to do is just put some of this never seize on here. Just don't need much, but just a little bit will help make it easier for the next person who has to undo it. So a very light coating, we don't want too much of that in there. And then we need to coat the oil seal with oil. Just make sure that it is well lubricated, so that when we start up, that seal does not get damaged. And the same thing with the pulley, we want to just make sure that there's a good coating of oil on this pulley surface here, where it will be going through the seal. Right, and then importantly we've got to make sure we line up the keyway with the key, so that we don't damage the key or the keyway. Once that's in, just give it a tap so that it stays there. We're going to take our pulley installation tool over there and screw it into the center of the pulley. Make sure that we screw it all the way in so that it bottoms out. Right, and then we're going to just use our wrenches to screw this pulley onto the shaft over there. So I'm going to go and get some wrenches for this over here, and then we will install this pulley. So I put a little dab of paint on the timing mark on the harmonic balancer over there, and you'll see that that timing mark aligns with 0. And if we go and look at piston number 1, it is at top dead center. So our timing is still intact after we installed the pulley. And you'll also note that over here, these two surfaces here are now flush. So we can go ahead now and install the bolt that holds this pulley in place. With the harmonic balancer now installed, we're going to go ahead and install the bolt. And the service manual says that it needs to be lubricated and then torqued to 80 foot-pounds. So I'm just going to make sure that we've got some oil on these surfaces over here, like that, and then we're going to go ahead and install this and torque it to 80 foot-pounds. So all we have to do now is torque this bolt to 80 foot-pounds. And I'm using a pry bar at the back over here just to hold the crank, which I gently just put on one of the counterweights. So we've torqued to 80 foot-pounds. The next thing we're going to do is install the brace and torque these bolts down to 35 foot-pounds as per the service manual. Next I'm going to reinstall the oil pump. Now this is a brand new oil pump. It is a standard flow oil pump. I've decided not to use a high volume oil pump. The reason being that we have new bearings throughout, new cam bearings, new main bearings, and new rod bearings. Well, therefore we should have good oil pressure on a standard pump. So this is new pump, standard volume. I've put a new gasket in there with a very thin smear of silicone sealer. Probably shouldn't have to put the silicone sealer in there. I just choose to do that, make sure we have a good seal over there. I have reused the old oil tube over there. However, I have put some sealer on over there just to make sure that it seals correctly. So I'm going to go ahead, install the oil pump and torque it to 17 foot-pounds as per the service manual. Right, as I've been turning this engine over by hand, what I've noticed is that when my timing mark reaches about there, there's a sudden hard stop and I can't rotate it any further. So let's see. As I rotate it, you'll see it rotates just fine, and then just there it stops. So no matter what I do here, and I don't want to press too hard, it just will not rotate past this point.
Alright, so immediately I can see what's wrong. If you look just over there, you will see that the crank is touching the girdle. So it's doing it there, and most likely it is touching it there as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a washer underneath here just to lift this girdle slightly, just to make a little bit more clearance over there. Typically that happens when you are changing the crank and you are stroking the motor. Because of the extra stroke, you get that contact over there. But I think I'm going to be able to fix that fairly quickly. So I'm going to go ahead, remove the girdle, add a washer underneath there, and then torque the girdle back down again. Everything on the bottom side of the engine is now done and installed. So we're going to go and put the gasket on, put the oil pan on, and then we'll flip the engine over and do the top side of the engine. What we're going to do next is prepare to put the head onto the block. Before we do that, we have to install our hydraulic lifters into the slots down there. So important to see on the lifters is we're going to be using new in lifters. That is for two reasons. First of all, we have a new camshaft, so we're going to put new lifters in. The second reason is, if you remember from our teardown video, that the lifters got mixed up, and so we didn't know which cylinder which lifters went to. So we're going to just put in a new set of lifters and start from there. We're going to coat the lifters with the break-in lubricant over there to make sure that we just ease the break-in period when that starts. We cleaned the head very, very well and have now placed the head gasket into position. Now, this is not a head gasket I've used before, so we'll see how that goes. But head gasket gets placed clean with no silicone, so we cleaned the block very well. We've placed the head gasket, and then we're going to put the head on top of this now. Right, so we had a slight struggle to get the two dowel pins that are in the back corners there and there to engage, but we did get them in, so our dowel pins are now engaged and this head is seated. So we're going to go ahead next and follow the process for installing the head bolts. So I have positioned the head bolts in the head. Now, just something to note, this bolt here, which is bolt number 11, requires Loctite 592 according to the service manual, and the reason is that this port is open to a water jacket. You'll note that I have put some oil around there, so just make sure that you add your Loctite 592 to this bolt before you install it. Another important thing to note is the location of the different bolts. These bolts down the side over here all have a stud on the top of the bolt, so a threaded stud on them. On the inside of the valve area, this bolt here and this bolt here, bolt 8 and 9, they have a dowel on them. So just make sure that when you're installing the bolts that you put the correct bolts in the right place. All of the other bolts over here are just the standard cap screws. So make sure that you put the correct bolts in the correct place, and then remember, for this bolt number 11 you need the 592, but also it's going to a different torque. So we're going to go ahead now and snug up these bolts, and then we'll follow the torque procedure dictated in the manual. Another important thing to note is that you have to have the correct tool to install these head bolts. What you need is a 12-point deep well socket, and the reason you need a deep socket is that you have to get over that stud section over there. It needs to be 12-point because you'll see that these studs are 12-point. So make sure that you have a half-inch 12-point deep well socket before you try and torque up these head bolts. We've gone ahead and run all the head bolts down. What we're going to do now is torque them in the sequence 1 through 14 to 22 foot-pounds according to the service manual as the first step. With the first step now complete, we're going to go to the second step, which is to torque them in sequence 1 through 14 to 45 foot-pounds. Right, so now that we've got all of the bolts torqued to 45 foot-pounds and double checked that they are at 45 foot-pounds, we are going to torque in the sequence that has 3 steps. The first, we're going to torque the first 10 bolts here, so we will end with this bolt over here, and we're going to torque those to 110 foot-pounds. Once we're done torquing those to 110 foot-pounds, we're going to come to bolt number 11 over here,
and that is only going to be torqued to 100 foot-pounds. Once we're done with that, we will do the remaining bolts, so 12, 13 and 14 to 110 foot-pounds again. So just remember, if you are doing this head and you're torquing these bolts, bolts 1 through 10, which means you're going to stop here, will be torqued to 110 foot-pounds. This one over here will then be torqued to 100 foot-pounds, and then the remaining 3 over there will be torqued to 110 foot-pounds again. And that will be the final torque sequence as in the service manual. We've now installed our pushers and rockers over here. So what we're going to do is follow the service manual and tighten these bolts. We'll do a turn on each bolt, one at a time, until they are down, and then we will torque them final torque to 21 foot-pounds according to the service manual. The next thing that we're going to go and do is install our accessories over there, as well as our water pump and thermostat, so that those jobs are complete. Right, we have most of the front accessories now installed. There are still the 2 pulleys that we need to install. I'm missing a bolt, which I will find as I go along, and just install those 2 pulleys. What I'm going to do next is to install the exhaust and intake manifolds over here. And what I've decided to do is replace these studs with brand new studs. So this one and this one over here, I'm going to go and install and torque them up according to the service manual. And then I'll go ahead and follow the procedure to install the intake and exhaust manifolds from our service manual. So the service manual says that what you do is you install the exhaust manifolds first, and then you just hand tighten nut number 3 while you wait to install the intake manifolds, and then you go on and install them all and torque in a sequence. So I'm going to go and install our new studs and then move on to installing the exhaust manifolds. We've got the new gasket installed over here, as well as the 2 new studs installed now. We're going to go ahead and install the exhaust manifolds next. The exhaust manifolds are now being held in place by this bolt number 3 over here. We're going to go and get the intake manifold next, and we're going to install the intake manifold, and then we're going to do bolts 1, 2, 4 and 5 underneath there. So let me get that intake manifold on there next. So just something to consider before you install your intake manifold. Remember, if there's any foreign debris, number 10 sockets, anything of the like inside any of those intake manifolds there, it's going to be sucked inside the engine the moment you crank the engine. So I suggest that you just take a minute and make sure that you are clean and that nothing is inside of there. The same with your intake manifold. Any debris that's inside of this intake manifold over here is going to be sucked inside of the engine. So I took compressed air and thoroughly blew out any debris that was inside of here. I'm going to do a visual inspection. There's nothing that rattles inside of there. Just make sure that there's nothing inside of here that can be sucked into the engine before you go and install the intake manifold onto the head. Something that's pretty easily missed is that the block actually has dowels for the intake manifold. So there's one over there, and on this side over here is the other dowel. So if the manifold is not sitting correctly, what will happen is it'll be looking like that, and you can see that it's not aligned with the dowel pin, and you need to make sure that your manifold actually drops down and then connects up with that dowel pin, and you can then install it onto the dowel pin like that. So just make sure that the dowel pins are engaged on the intake manifold. If not, what's going to happen is that your intake manifold is going to sit proud, and you'll then have a vacuum leak as it sucks air past the gasket. So just doing a double check to make sure that those are seated correctly. We're going to follow the torque sequence in the service manual to torque up the manifold bolts. So we're going to start with number 1 and number 2 over there, and go to 3, etc., all the way out. They're all going to be torqued to 24 foot-pounds according to the service manual, and then this bolt over here, number 6 and number 7, they will be torqued to 23 foot-pound. So we're going to go ahead and do that next. So our front accessories are all installed now. We have our intake and exhaust manifolds installed. We're going to go ahead and install our injectors as well as our throttle body.
pretty much everything has now been installed on this engine. We are almost ready to set it back into the Jeep. The last thing that I'm going to do over here is fill the engine up with engine oil to the correct level, and then I'm going to actually use a special tool to rotate the oil pump. Now I'll put the link to the special tool up here in the corner of the screen. You'll probably see it right now. But I made this little special tool, and the reason why I'm going to do this is I want to force oil through all of the empty galleries and the empty oil filter over here to make sure that I've got oil throughout the block before I crank the engine for the first time. Now, some of you will say that that's not necessary. As you crank the engine, it's going to fill with oil. This is a personal choice which I've made. I think it's just going to be better to have all of the oil galleries filled with oil and the oil filter filled with oil before I crank it for the first time, especially with this being a brand new rebuild. So let me get going with that and get engine oil through all of the galleries. Right, so you'll see here that the oil has now started to come out on top of these rocker arms over here. I'm going to rotate the drill, and you can actually see the oil coming out to the top. Right, so that's why I believe it's important to prime a brand new engine like that. We now know that the oil filter is full of oil, all the ports are full of oil, and we have oil that's all the way to the top. So I made this special tool over here to rotate my oil pump to pump the oil. If you want to know how to make this special tool, the link should be up in the top corner of the video right now. Click on that and I'll show you how I made this special tool using a screwdriver and a little bit of aluminum. I'm going to go ahead now, remove this special tool over here, and then I'm going to synchronize my camshaft position sensor so that we have the correct timing to start this engine. Except for the wiring harness, everything else has been done now. I'm going to go ahead now and install the cam position sensor over here and do the phasing of the cam position sensor. Now, if you have not yet seen how to phase a cam position sensor, up in the top corner of this video right now there's a little link, and if you click on that link, I will go into detail and explain exactly how to do this. The principle is to get the engine onto top dead center, which we already know it's at on this engine, and then you need to pin the cam position sensor, and then you are going to orientate it at about a 7 o'clock position and slide it into place so that you are sure it engages with both the oil pump as well as the cam gears on the inside over here. But use that link and go and watch that video as I explain in detail how to do it. So before I start the installation of the oil pump, I've checked that the engine is at top dead center, and then I'm going to try and position the oil pump down there. So I'm just using a flat screwdriver and I've rotated the oil pump to around about the 11 o'clock position, which I believe is correct to install the cam position sensor. Right, so I'm going to put some oil onto the gear teeth there, make sure that they're well lubricated. My drill bit over here, which is my pin, is still installed. If you need to know why I've got a drill bit in there, go and have a look at that video, it'll help to explain it. I'm now going to position the sensor at roughly 7 o'clock over here, so not straight down, but about a 7 o'clock position. And then as I slide it in, it should engage with the teeth and cause it to rotate. And right now, as you can see at the bottom here, it's not sitting properly. So if I force it all the way down, you'll see it's pointing backwards. So I need to start it again in a slightly different orientation, but before I do that, I'll just need to rotate the oil pump drive at the bottom again. So I'm going to go in there, adjust the oil pump to about that position. Now I'm going to try this again. Start with this drive pointing in about a 7 o'clock position over there, and allow it to rotate in. There we go. So what you'll see now is that it is pointing rearward in the orientation that it should be, and it's engaged fully at the bottom over here. So I know we're contacting the oil pump drive, so I'm happy that this position is now correct. What I'm going to do next is install the keeper screw and clamp this down with this pointing backwards in that orientation. Final thing to do, and always remember, is to remove your drill bit so that doesn't get snapped off and damage your cam position sensor. So the very last thing I'm going to do before I get ready to set this engine back in the Jeep is reinstall my wiring harness and connect up to all the connectors on the engine. So we got the engine back together again. It's ready to go back into the Jeep. Join us in our final episode where we put this engine back, take the Jeep for a spin. And also we go into a lessons learned where we go through some of the things we would do differently if we did this project over again. So please make sure to subscribe to our channel. It helps us making these videos. And hope to see you around for the last episode where we finish up the Jeep.
I'll make it look like I'm losing. Won't bother hiding my bruises. And when they finally think you're wounded, then it's your chance to be ruthless.